If you have never sat in a room where a stranger in a black robe holds the entire future of your bloodline in their hands, pray you never do. It is a specific kind of suffocation. The only sound was the rhythmic, arrogant clicking of a gold ballpoint pen against a mahogany table. Click, click, click. Marcus rested his large, calloused hands on the defense table. He kept them flat, palms down, trying to still the tremors that lived in his fingers. He looked at his knuckles, scarred from years of wrenching bolts and welding steel, the skin darker than the polished oak beneath them. He didn't look up. He didn't look at the judge. And he certainly didn't look at the man in the $3,000 charcoal suit who was currently dissecting his life as if it were a biology experiment. Your Honor, the voice was smooth, cultured, and laced with a poison so subtle it almost sounded like concern. We are not suggesting Mr. Vance is a bad man. We are simply suggesting that love, unfortunately, does not pay for private tutoring. It does not pay for orthodontics. It does not provide a stable, dual-income household in a gated community. Attorney Sterling paused, letting the words hang in the air like smoke. He turned, offering a sympathetic, patronizing smile to the gallery, then back to the judge. We are suggesting that sufficiency is not enough for a child like Maya. She deserves opportunity. And frankly, the defendant's current living situation, a 2-bedroom walk-up in East District, is barely subsistence. It is survival, and Maya deserves to thrive. Marcus felt the heat rise in his neck, a slow, burning tide. But he remained a statue. To his right, sitting on a small wooden bench against the wall, was Maya. She was 7 years old. She wore her Sunday best, a yellow dress with white lace that Marcus had ironed himself at 5 a.m. that morning, careful not to scorch the delicate fabric. Her hair was braided tight and neat, beads clicking softly as she shifted. She was looking at her shoes. She knew, with the terrifying intuition of a child, that the man in the suit was using big words to take her away. Marcus breathed in through his nose, out through his nose. Control, he told himself. Do not give them the angry black man they are painting you to be. Be the stone. The woman sitting next to Attorney Sterling shifted in her seat. Elena, his ex-wife. She looked beautiful, of course. She always did. Her hair was professionally blown out, her makeup flawless, her suit a soft cream color that screamed wealth. She wouldn't look at Marcus either. She looked at the judge, tears welling in her eyes, tears that appeared on cue, practiced and perfect. She had left 3 years ago when the money got tight, when the garage Marcus owned hit a rough patch. She had found a new life, a new husband, a developer named Richard who played golf on Tuesdays and didn't come home with grease under his fingernails. Now, they wanted Maya. Not because they needed her, Marcus suspected, but because she was the final accessory to complete their perfect family portrait. Mr. Sterling, Judge Holloway said, peering over the rim of her spectacles. She was a stern woman, tired of domestic squabbles, her face a map of patience worn thin. Get to the point. You are petitioning for full physical custody based on financial disparity? Based on stability, Your Honor, Sterling corrected smoothly, and negligence. The word hit the room like a physical blow. Marcus's head snapped up. This was new. They had argued about money. They had argued about school districts, but negligence? Explain, the judge said, her pen hovering over her notepad. Sterling walked toward the bench, his shoes making no sound on the carpet. He looked like a shark gliding through deep water. We have evidence, Your Honor, that Mr. Vance is frequently absent during critical hours. He works erratic shifts. He leaves the child unsupervised. And most damningly, he has failed to provide adequate medical attention when required. We have a timeline that shows a pattern of carelessness. Sterling walked back to his table and picked up a thick, leather-bound binder. He dropped it on the judge's bench with a heavy thud. October 14th, Sterling announced. The child Maya suffered a severe asthma attack. According to our records, Mr. Vance did not take her to the emergency room until 4 hours after the symptoms began. 4 hours, Your Honor. In a respiratory crisis, that is a lifetime. That is not poverty. That is neglect. A murmur went through the few people in the back of the courtroom. Marcus blinked. October 14th. He felt the memory wash over him. The rain, the panic, the sound of Maya wheezing, her chest heaving like a trapped bird. And, Sterling continued, his voice dropping to a theatrical whisper, Mrs. Elena Vance, now Elena Thorne, was the one who eventually had to intervene, driving across the city to ensure her daughter received care because the father was unavailable. Elena sobbed quietly into a tissue. It was a delicate sound, heartbreaking to anyone who didn't know the truth. Marcus looked at his hands again. They were trembling now, not from fear, from the sheer impossible weight of the lie. Mr. Vance, the judge said, her voice sharp, you are representing yourself today? Marcus stood up. His chair scraped loudly against the floor, a jagged noise in the smooth room. He was a large man, broad-shouldered, wearing a suit he had bought at a thrift store. It fit poorly in the shoulders, tight across the chest. He looked like exactly what they said he was, a man out of his depth. Yes, Your Honor, Marcus said. His voice was deep, gravelly, and quiet. Do you have a response to these allegations, specifically the incident on October 14th? Sterling smirked. He leaned back in his chair, checking his watch. He had a lunch reservation at 12:30. This would be over by then. He watched the mechanic fumble with a stack of papers on his table. Marcus didn't have a leather binder. He didn't have a paralegal. He had a battered red spiral-bound notebook. The cover was torn. It had grease stains on the corner. It looked like trash. I do, Your Honor, Marcus said. Well, the judge gestured. Proceed. Marcus picked up the notebook. He held it with both hands, as if it were a holy text. Mr. Sterling says I was unavailable, Marcus said, his voice slow. He says I waited 4 hours. The medical admission records don't lie, Mr. Vance, Sterling interjected from his seat, not bothering to stand. She was admitted at 8:15 p.m. The school nurse called you at 4 p.m. That's right, Marcus said. He didn't look at Sterling. He looked at the judge. The nurse called at 4:00 p.m. Marcus opened the red notebook. The sound of the paper turning was the only noise in the room. I am a mechanic, Your Honor, Marcus said. I fix diesel trucks. When you fix engines, you have to log everything, every bolt, every turn, every timestamp. If you miss one thing, an engine blows up and people die. So, I write everything down. It's a habit. He turned to a page marked with a sticky note. May I approach the bench? The judge nodded, intrigued by the sudden shift in the big man's demeanor. Marcus walked forward. He didn't glide like Sterling. He walked with a heavy, deliberate gait. He placed the notebook next to Sterling's leather binder. This is my log for October 14th, Marcus said. The judge looked down. The handwriting was blocky, precise, and written in blue ink. 03:58 p.m. Call from school nurse, Mrs. Gable. Maya, wheezing. 4:02 p.m. Clocked out of shop. Supervisor, Mike T. 04:18 p.m. Arrived at Carver Elementary. 04:20 p.m. Administered emergency inhaler. Wheezing persisted. 04:25 p.m. Called Elena. No answer. 04:30 p.m. Called Elena. Sent to voicemail. 04:35 p.m. En route to St. Jude's urgent care. Objection. Sterling stood up, buttoning his jacket. This is just handwriting in a notebook. This isn't evidence. Anyone can write a diary. Marcus turned his head slowly. For the first time, he locked eyes with the lawyer. Marcus's eyes were calm, dark, and terrifyingly clear. I'm not done, Marcus said softly. The judge raised a hand to silence Sterling. Continue, Mr. Vance. Marcus reached into a manila envelope he had brought with him. He pulled out a stack of stapled papers. I knew the timeline would matter, Marcus said, because I know how Elena remembers things. She remembers them the way she wants them to be. He placed the first paper down. This is the GPS data from my work truck. It tracks ignition on, ignition off, and location every 30 seconds. My boss printed it out and notarized it. The judge leaned in, adjusting her glasses. She traced the lines with her finger. Ignition off at Carver Elementary 4:18 p.m., the judge read. Marcus placed the next paper down. This is the intake form from St. Jude's urgent care, not the ER. We went to urgent care first because it was closer. We arrived at 4:45 p.m. The judge nodded. And then? They didn't have the pediatric nebulizer needed for her specific condition. They told us to transfer to the main hospital, That's why the hospital admission is at 8:15 p.m. We were in transit and waiting for an ambulance transfer. Sterling was standing now, his face flushing a light shade of pink. Your Honor, this is splitting hairs. The mother was still the one who… October 14th, Marcus interrupted, his voice gaining a slight edge of steel. You said Elena drove across the city to save her, that I was unavailable. Marcus pulled out a third piece of paper. It was a printed screenshot from a social media archive. Elena didn't answer my calls because she wasn't in the city, Your Honor. She was at a wine tasting in Napa, 3 hours away. The courtroom went dead silent. Even the air conditioning seemed to stop humming. Marcus pointed to the timestamp on the photo. It showed Elena, smiling, holding a glass of Pinot Noir, with the rolling hills of a vineyard in the background. Date: Oct. 14. Time: 5:30 p.m. Caption: Finally some me time. She didn't arrive at the hospital until the next morning, Marcus said, his voice dropping back to that quiet rumble. She came in with a coffee, took a selfie with Maya in the hospital bed, and left after 20 minutes. Elena gasped. The date is wrong on that upload. It's metadata, Elena, Marcus said, speaking to her directly for the first time. It's stamped in the file. The judge looked from the photo to Elena, then to Sterling. The look she gave the lawyer was withering. It was a look that ended careers. Mr. Sterling, the judge said, her voice ice cold, you stood before this court and claimed my client, the mother, was the primary caregiver during a medical emergency. You claimed the father was negligent. I was relying on my client's recollection, Sterling stammered, the smooth veneer cracking. He looked at Elena, who was now pale, clutching her purse with white knuckles. Your client's recollection, the judge repeated. She turned back to the red notebook. She flipped through a few more pages. Mr. Vance, the judge asked, what else is in this book? Everything, Your Honor, Marcus said. Every time I picked her up, every time Elena canceled, every time she was late, every meal I cooked, every parent-teacher conference I attended alone. I have receipts stapled to the pages, gas logs, phone records. He paused, looking at his daughter. Maya was looking up at him now, her eyes wide. She gave him a tiny, tentative smile. I don't have a big house, Marcus said, addressing the room. I don't have a pool, and I can't buy her a pony, but I am there. Every single day, I am there. I don't miss, I don't forget, and I don't lie. He looked at Sterling. You called me subsistence. You said I'm just surviving. Marcus shook his head slowly. You think money is the only way to thrive, but you can't buy what I give that little girl. You can't write a check for presents. The silence that followed was different than the one at the start. The suffocating pressure was gone. Now, it was a silence of awe. The kind of silence that happens when the truth enters a room and strips everything else away. The judge closed the leather binder Sterling had submitted and pushed it to the side of her desk. It slid across the wood and nearly fell off the edge. She pulled the red notebook closer to the center. The court finds, the judge began, her voice resonating off the walls, that the testimony provided by the plaintiff is, at best, unreliable, and at worst, perjury. Elena let out a small, strangled sound. Sterling slumped in his chair, rubbing his forehead. He knew what was coming. He had underestimated the man in the cheap suit. He had looked at the calloused hands and assumed the mind was slow. He had made the fatal mistake of confusing poverty with stupidity. Mr. Vance, the judge said, her expression softening for the first time. It is the opinion of this court that you are not merely sufficient. You are exemplary. She picked up her pen. Not a gold one, just a standard black pen. Full physical custody is granted to the father, Marcus Vance. Visitation for the mother will be supervised, pending a review of these discrepancies. The gavel came down. Bang. It wasn't a loud sound, but it felt like the earth settling back onto its axis. Marcus didn't cheer. He didn't smile. He simply nodded, a slow, deep nod of respect. He gathered his papers. He closed the red notebook and tucked it under his arm. He turned and walked toward the back of the room. Elena was crying, arguing in hushed, frantic tones with Sterling, who was aggressively packing his briefcase, ignoring her. They were already turning on each other. Marcus walked past them. He didn't stop. He didn't gloat. He didn't say, I told you so. He walked straight to the wooden bench where the little girl in the yellow dress sat. Maya stood up. She didn't ask what happened. She looked at her dad's face, saw the calmness there, and she knew. Marcus knelt on one knee, bringing himself to her eye level. The knees of his suit were worn, but he didn't care. He reached out and gently fixed the collar of her dress. "Ready to go, baby girl?" he whispered. "Can we get ice cream?" she asked, her voice small. "Not just ice cream," Marcus said, lifting her up into his arms effortlessly. She buried her face in his neck, smelling of motor oil and laundry detergent, the smell of safety. "We can get anything you want." He walked out of the courtroom, his heavy boots echoing on the floor. As he pushed open the heavy double doors, sunlight flooded into the dim hallway. He didn't look back at the lawyer, or the ex-wife, or the judge. He just held his daughter tight, feeling the steady beat of her heart against his chest, a rhythm that made more sense than any law ever written. The room behind them remained silent, staring at the empty doorframe, realizing that the richest man in the room had just walked out.